Welcome to Capital Explained, where we break down the world's biggest financial, political, and economic stories in a way that actually makes sense. If you want to understand how money, power, and global systems really work, make sure to subscribe to the channel and stay ahead of the game. In March 2026, a report by Open the Books revealed something that caught many people off guard. The United States government had managed to spend nearly $50 billion in just 5 days. While some of that spending was expected, military operations, logistics, and defense systems, what stood out were the surprising details buried within. Millions were spent on items like Alaskan king crab, ribeye steaks, and lobster tails, raising serious questions about how taxpayer money is actually being used. Around the same time, Donald Trump proposed increasing the defense budget to $1.5 trillion, despite the US already being the world's largest military spender. This raises a deeper question: where does all this money really go? The answer is far more complex than just weapons and war. A large portion of the defense budget is consumed by maintaining a global military presence, with hundreds of bases spread across different countries. These bases require constant funding for infrastructure, transport, food supply, and personnel welfare. On top of that, the Pentagon operates like a massive organization, covering salaries, healthcare, housing, and pensions for millions of people. Before even purchasing a single weapon, hundreds of billions are already spent just to keep the system running. Then comes procurement, where things get even more expensive. Advanced fighter jets, submarines, missile systems, and emerging technologies like space defense and AI command systems cost enormous amounts of money. Over time, the focus has shifted from traditional ground warfare to high-tech dominance in space, cyber, and missile systems. At the same time, the US is investing heavily in modernizing its nuclear arsenal, replacing aging systems that date back decades. These programs alone cost tens of billions each year, and the total continues to grow. However, one of the biggest reasons behind these massive costs lies in how defense contracts work. A significant share of the budget goes to private contractors, and due to limited competition, a handful of major companies dominate the industry. Many contracts are structured in a way where the government covers all costs plus guaranteed profit, removing the incentive to keep expenses low. As a result, projects often run far over budget, turning already expensive programs into trillion-dollar commitments over time. In the end, the US defense budget is not just about war. It's a vast, complex system that supports global influence, economic networks, and political interests. What looks like a budget on paper often behaves more like an expanding system with no clear limits. And as global tensions rise and new technologies emerge, one thing becomes clear: this system isn't slowing down, it's only getting bigger. One of the biggest reasons the US defense budget keeps expanding lies in a system that's incredibly difficult to shut down. Take the F-35 program as an example. Its supply chain stretches across dozens of states. This means that any attempt to cut funding doesn't just affect a defense project, it directly impacts jobs in multiple political districts. For lawmakers, that creates a powerful incentive to keep these programs alive, regardless of cost or performance. Over time, this has turned many military projects into too big to cancel systems, locking in spending for decades. But where inefficiency exists, opportunity follows. By the early 2000s, tech companies began noticing just how lucrative defense contracts could be. Unlike traditional contractors, newer firms started focusing on software, data, and artificial intelligence. Companies specializing in data analytics began building systems capable of processing massive amounts of intelligence, everything from satellite imagery to financial transactions, turning raw data into real-time battlefield decisions. These tools have already been used in modern conflicts to identify and strike targets at a speed that was previously impossible, fundamentally changing how wars are fought. What makes this even more interesting is that despite billions being poured into AI and advanced systems, there is no clearly defined AI budget in official defense spending. Instead, artificial intelligence is embedded across multiple categories: cybersecurity, autonomous weapons, surveillance, and command systems. This makes it extremely difficult to track the true scale of investment. However, estimates suggest tens of billions of dollars are already being spent on autonomous drones, robotic systems, AI assisted warfare, and cyber operations. Since the mid 2010s, total spending on these technologies has quietly grown into one of the fastest expanding areas of defense. At the same time, proposals to dramatically increase military spending have introduced a new layer of complexity. While the official defense budget is approved annually, additional funding can be pushed through separate mechanisms that face far less scrutiny. This allows for ambitious and sometimes controversial projects to move forward without the same level of oversight. Among these ideas are futuristic defense systems involving large-scale satellite networks designed to intercept missiles in space. While theoretically powerful, experts argue that building such systems at scale would require enormous resources far beyond initial estimates. There are also plans to expand naval dominance with next generation warships designed to be larger, more advanced, and heavily armed with cutting edge weaponry. However, these projects often take decades to complete and come with significant cost overruns. At the same time, autonomous warfare programs, ranging from drone swarms to unmanned submarines, are rapidly becoming a central focus, reflecting a broader shift toward technology-driven conflict. The challenge, however, isn't just spending, it's paying for it. Initial strategies to fund these expansions relied on increased revenue streams and aggressive cost-cutting measures across the government. But many of those projections have fallen short, leaving borrowing as the primary option. This adds to an already massive national debt, raising concerns about long-term sustainability. Historically, this pattern isn't new. Major global powers, from ancient empires to modern superstates, have often increased military spending during periods when their economic dominance was being challenged. While military strength can act as a tool of influence and deterrence, it can also mask deeper economic shifts happening beneath the surface. Today, the United States still holds enormous economic power, but its share of the global economy has gradually declined as other nations rise. Despite this, it continues to account for a disproportionately large share of global military spending. Adding another layer to this evolving landscape is the growing importance of critical resources. Modern warfare is no longer driven solely by troops and weapons, but by technology, and at the core of that technology are rare earth elements and strategic minerals. These materials are essential for everything from advanced missiles to AI systems and electronic warfare. Control over these resources is becoming just as important as military strength itself. With supply chains heavily concentrated in a few regions, particularly in countries like China, access to these materials has become a strategic vulnerability for the West. As a result, nations are now racing to secure domestic sources and build independent supply chains. Because in the future, power may not just belong to the countries with the strongest armies, but to those who control the materials that make those armies possible. And when you connect all of these pieces together, rising costs, new technologies, global competition, and resource dependency, it becomes clear that this isn't just about defense spending anymore. It's about the shifting balance of global power in a rapidly changing world.